This is my true story. My son joined the Army when he was 19. He left home wearing his uniform with pride and promised he would return as a hero. But that day became the last time I saw him. A few months later, they told me he was missing in action. No body, no proof, just silence. 35 years passed, and I learned to live with the ache of not knowing. But one morning, everything changed. I saw him again, alive, broken, begging on the streets. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. He was 19 when he joined the Army. Still young, still full of dreams. He stood tall in that green uniform, his shoulders straight, his face shining with pride. I remember the morning clearly. The sky was clear, the air cold, and the village gathered to see him off. People clapped, proud that one of our own was going to serve the country. My wife cried quietly beside me, holding his photo to her chest. I tried to stay strong. Fathers don't cry, we tell ourselves. But when he saluted me one last time, I felt my throat close up. He smiled that confident smile and said he'd come back soon. He promised to make me proud. I believed him. Every father wants to believe his son's promises. I packed food for him, gave him my old watch, and told him to write whenever he could. As he walked down the dusty road toward the Army truck, I stood there until he disappeared from sight. I didn't know that would be the last time I'd ever see my boy the way I remembered him. Young, brave, full of light. For the first few weeks, his letters came regularly. He'd write about training, about his new friends, about the cold nights on duty. He always ended with the same line. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll make you proud." I kept every letter in a small box near my bed. My wife read them aloud every night, smiling even as tears filled her eyes. Then, suddenly, the letters stopped. 1 week turned into 2. 2 weeks into a month. We told ourselves maybe he was busy, maybe communication was down. But deep down, I started to feel something heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't come from distance, but from loss. Then one morning, an official envelope arrived. It carried the Army seal. My wife opened it with shaking hands. Her face went pale before she said a word. The letter said my son was missing in action. His convoy had been ambushed in the northern mountains. They couldn't recover the bodies. They couldn't confirm if anyone survived. My legs gave out. I fell to the floor and stared at the words until they blurred. Missing in action. Not dead. Not alive. Just gone. We waited for more news, but none came. I went to the nearest Army office, begged for answers. They said they were still searching. Weeks turned into months. Eventually, they stopped replying. My wife spent every day by the window, waiting for a knock that never came. The village moved on. People stopped asking. Time swallowed his name, like it does to everyone who disappears in war. But we never did. Every night before sleeping, my wife would whisper, "He'll come home tomorrow." And every morning, she'd open the door first thing, just in case. I tried to stay strong for her. I worked in the fields, fixed broken fences, anything to keep my mind busy. But every time I saw a soldier pass by, I'd stop whatever I was doing and stare. I'd study their faces, hoping, praying, one might be him. But he never came. Years passed. His things stayed untouched, his books, his medals, his photo on the wall. My wife would dust them every morning, as if he might return that day. And every evening, she'd sit by the lamp and say softly, "He promised he'd make us proud." I couldn't tell her the truth. That maybe he never would. The letter said missing in action. No explanation, no details. Only those 3 words printed in black ink. The convoy was ambushed in the mountains. The report said they searched for days, but found nothing. No body, no weapon, no uniform, just ashes and burned trucks scattered on the snow-covered road. The house became silent. The walls felt empty. My wife stopped cooking his favorite meals. The bed stayed untouched. The radio stayed off. The photo of him in uniform was placed on the table beside a candle that burned every night. Days passed into weeks. Weeks turned into years. The letters stopped coming. The officers stopped visiting. His name slowly disappeared from the lists and the papers. The neighbors stopped asking questions. People stopped visiting. I went to the army base every month. I waited in long lines, holding the same documents, hearing the same answers. No update, no recovery, no trace. I walked home each time with heavier feet and emptier hands. The medal they gave for his service sat inside a small box. I buried it behind the house under a stone and called it his grave. I stood there for hours, staring at the dirt, trying to imagine what part of him the world had taken. The winters felt longer after that, the nights colder. The wind carried his name, and sometimes I thought I heard his voice in it. I never stopped hoping. Every knock on the door made my heart race. Every sound of boots on the road made me look up. My wife's health began to fade. She would sit near the window all day, staring at the path he walked on when he left. She spoke less, slept less. Her hands trembled when she touched his picture. The light in her eyes dimmed each year. The house aged with us. The paint peeled. The floor cracked. The garden grew wild. The air smelled like waiting. The military sent a final notice after 10 years. They declared him officially dead. They sent a flag folded inside a box. I didn't open it. I placed it beside his old shoes and locked the drawer. I lived like a shadow after that. No celebrations, no New Year, no festivals. Only routine. Waking up, walking, eating, sleeping, surviving. His name was the only thing that stayed alive in the house. Every wall carried it. Every dream repeated it. The letter that took him away still lies on my shelf. Torn edges, faded ink, but the same 3 words. Missing in action. The phrase that ended everything without giving an ending. The house became quieter after she died. Her chair stayed empty. Her clothes stayed folded on the bed. Her side of the room smelled faintly of flowers long after she was gone. The light by the window kept burning each night. I never turned it off. It was the only thing that made the house feel alive. The neighbors stopped coming by. They said time heals everything. It didn't. Time only teaches how to live with the hole left behind. I ate alone, slept alone, worked alone. The sound of footsteps in the yard would make my heart jump, even if it was only the wind. The photograph of him in uniform hung on the wall. His medals lay in a box on the table. The flag they gave me gathered dust in a drawer. Every evening, I'd walk to the field where he used to play as a boy. The swings were gone, the grass had grown high, but I could still see him there in my mind, laughing, running, alive. The years passed like smoke. I grew older, slower, smaller. The world around me changed, but my life stayed the same. Every morning began with hope. Every night ended with silence. I'd listen to the radio just to hear news from the border. I'd watch every military parade, looking for a face I knew wasn't there. The rooms stayed ready for him, his shoes by the door, his blanket folded neatly, his photograph watching me from every corner. The bed never used by anyone else. The promise of return never broken, only delayed. The seasons moved on. Spring, summer, winter, all looked the same. The trees outside aged with me. The paint peeled, the roof leaked, but I never left. I couldn't. It was the only place that still felt like his. The nights were hardest, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. Sometimes I'd wake up thinking I heard his voice. Sometimes I'd light a candle and sit in the dark until morning. People told me to let go. They said closure was necessary. But how do you bury someone when you never saw his face one last time? How do you stop waiting when no one ever said it's over? I lived in that waiting. It became my world, my meals, my prayers, my heartbeat. Every morning I told myself, maybe today. And when the day ended, I'd whisper, maybe tomorrow. 35 years passed that way. 35 years of empty mornings and quiet nights. And then, one cold winter day, I finally found him. But not the way I dreamed. 35 years is a long time to wait. The world changed again and again, but inside my small house, nothing moved. The same walls, the same chair, the same photo of a young soldier smiling in uniform, the same silence that never stopped echoing. I lived each year like a copy of the last, sunrise, work, sunset, memory. The seasons kept turning, but my world stayed frozen in the year he disappeared. The first 10 years were filled with searching. I visited every veterans hospital I could find. I spoke to officers, nurses, retired soldiers, anyone who might have seen his face. I walked through wards filled with broken men, their bodies wrapped in scars, their eyes empty from things they'd seen. I showed his picture to everyone. Some nodded politely, some shook their heads, some said they weren't sure. I always left hoping that maybe the next place would give me an answer. It never did. I went to memorial services, stood among families who had closure. They cried over graves with names. I cried over an empty box buried behind my house. The world moved forward. They built new homes, new memories. I stayed behind, trapped between the past and the possibility that he might still be out there somewhere, breathing under the same sky. The second 10 years were filled with pretending. I learned how to smile in front of others. I learned how to say, "I'm fine," when people asked. I started fixing radios, mending shoes, anything to keep my hands busy. But even when I worked, I was listening. For footsteps, for a knock, for the sound of my son's voice calling Dad. I would pause at random moments, my heart racing, thinking I heard him outside. It was always just the wind. In those years, I stopped celebrating birthdays. I stopped counting mine and his. It felt wrong to celebrate without him. I stopped putting up decorations during festivals. People noticed and stopped inviting me. It was easier that way. Hope became my only companion. It sat beside me every night, whispering that maybe tomorrow would be different. Then came the last 15 years, the years when I grew old, when my hands started shaking, when my knees refused to bend. My hair turned white, my eyesight dimmed, but the image of him never faded. He stayed 19 forever in my mind, frozen in that uniform, forever young, forever brave. Sometimes I wondered if he'd recognize me if he walked through the door. Sometimes I wasn't sure I'd recognize him either. I went back to the Army office once more. The staff was new. They didn't know his name. They looked through files and said there was nothing left. "Records lost," they said. Lost. The word that had followed my son since the day he left. I began searching outside the official routes. I walked through railway stations, bus stands, and shelters. I looked at faces under bridges, in alleys, in crowds. I spoke to old veterans sleeping on cardboard, their medals hanging from torn coats. None were him, but each one reminded me that someone, somewhere, had forgotten them too. At night, I sat by the lamp, holding his photograph. I spoke to it silently, not asking questions, just keeping company. When I got older, even speaking became hard. My breath would tire halfway through the words. Still, I whispered, "Come home." The years after my wife died were the longest. The bed stayed cold on one side. The light by the window never went out. Every evening I lit it, not as a habit, but as a promise, that if he ever came back, he would know where to find me. People around the village grew old. Their children returned from cities, built new homes. Mine never came back. His name became a story people told their children. A brave boy who went missing in war. I hated hearing that. He wasn't a story. He was my son. 35 years is long enough to lose everything. Strength, hope, even memory. But somehow, I still remembered his face, his voice, his walk. I still believed I would find him, alive or dead, one way or another. And one winter morning, when the wind was sharp and the city streets were crowded, I finally did. It was winter, the kind of cold that cuts through the bones. I had come to the city for a medical checkup. The hospital was crowded, noisy, filled with faces that blurred together. I finished early and decided to walk instead of taking the bus. My legs were slow, but walking made me feel alive. The city had changed over the years. Taller buildings, louder streets, faster people. But among all that noise, something small caught my eye. At the corner of the road near the traffic light, a group of beggars sat in a line. Most people walked past them without looking. I almost did too. But then, one of them lifted his head. His face was covered in dirt, his beard thick and untrimmed, his eyes sunken deep into the skull. There was something in those eyes, something that froze me where I stood. I didn't recognize the man, but my body did. My chest tightened. My heart started beating faster. He looked back at me. For a second, the noise of the city disappeared. I saw the color of his eyes, faded, tired, but familiar. My feet stopped moving. My hands started to shake. I stared at him, unable to breathe. He looked away first, but I couldn't. Something inside me said, "Don't move." I stepped closer. His clothes were torn, layered with dust and cold. His hands were rough, his fingers cracked from years of street life. There were scars along his neck, thin and white like faded lines from an old wound. His shoes didn't match. His face was older, worn out by time and suffering. But beneath all that, I saw him, the same boy who once left home in a clean uniform and promised to come back. The traffic light turned red. Cars stopped. People stared at me, wondering why an old man had frozen in the middle of the road. I didn't care. My world had stopped moving. I kept staring at him, and slowly, as if the memory inside him had woken up, he looked at me again. His eyes widened. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he blinked hard, like he didn't believe what he was seeing. I felt the strength leave my legs. I walked to him slowly, step by step, until I was standing right in front of him. The closer I got, the clearer it became. The shape of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow, the curve of his nose, all the same. 35 years had passed, but blood doesn't forget blood. He didn't speak. His lips trembled. His hands fumbled with the torn blanket around his shoulders. I could see the confusion in his eyes. Not recognition at first, but fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being known. Fear of remembering. I knelt down. The cold pavement bit into my knees, but I didn't feel it. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the sound of cars honking behind us. I looked at him closely, searching for the soldier I lost, the boy who said he'd make me proud. And then it hit me. The eyes, the same brown shade, the same sadness I'd seen when he said goodbye at the gate. He was alive. But the man sitting in front of me wasn't my son anymore. He was a ghost, wearing his face. He didn't speak, but tears filled his eyes. I could see his lips moving slightly, trying to form words that never came out. His body shook, not from the cold, but from something deeper: shame, pain, disbelief. The world around us kept moving. People walked past, cars honked, the signal changed. But I stayed there, frozen, staring at the man I had buried in my heart 3 decades ago. I reached out, my hand trembling. His eyes met mine again, and in that moment, the years vanished. The boy who went missing in the mountains was sitting on a cold street corner, forgotten by the world, unseen by everyone but me. He was home, but in the worst way imaginable. He sat there on the sidewalk, shivering in the cold, surrounded by people who didn't even notice him. Cars rushed by, horns blaring, but I couldn't hear anything. The world around me faded. All I could see was my son, or what was left of him. His hair was long, matted, streaked with gray. His skin was rough, his beard thick, his nails black with dirt. The man who once stood straight in uniform now sat bent, shaking, with a tin bowl resting between his knees. His eyes were tired. They didn't carry anger or shame, just emptiness. His body was alive, but something inside him wasn't. He looked like a man who had carried too many winters inside him. His hands trembled as he picked up a few coins someone had thrown near his feet. I wanted to shout, to cry, to run to him, but my legs wouldn't move. My chest felt heavy, my breath short. It didn't feel real. I had imagined this reunion for 35 years. I thought he'd come home in uniform, medals on his chest, strong and smiling. I thought I'd hug him and say, "You kept your promise." But this wasn't that story. This wasn't pride. This was pain wearing a face I used to love. The soldier I remembered was gone. What sat before me was someone who had been forgotten by the world. He looked up again, eyes glassy, lips cracked. There was recognition in his stare, slow, hesitant, like a man trying to remember a dream he thought he'd forgotten. He blinked, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. I felt my knees weaken. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He just stared at me like he couldn't believe I was real. My hands trembled as I knelt beside him. The ground was cold, hard, unkind. I reached out, afraid to touch him, afraid he might vanish if I did. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake. Silent tears fell on his hands. It was the kind of crying that has no sound, only pain. I wanted to speak, but there were no words left. I had waited decades for this moment. Yet now, I wished I hadn't found him. Because what I found wasn't my son. It was the shadow of a boy who once said he'd make me proud. People around us kept walking. A few stopped for a second, curious, then moved on. No one knew what was happening. No one cared. The world had already passed him by, long before I arrived. The city noise came back all at once. Horns, engines, voices, footsteps. But I heard nothing except my own heartbeat. Each beat was heavier than the last. He looked older than me. The lines on his face told stories I would never hear. He had seen things no father should imagine. His uniform had turned into rags, his medals into scars, his pride into survival. I stayed beside him, frozen in disbelief. I couldn't cry. My body was too numb. 35 years of hope had turned into one moment of unbearable truth. I watched him pick up the bowl again. He didn't look at me this time. He held it out, the way beggars do when they ask strangers for help. My throat closed. The man I had fed as a child was now asking for food from the world that forgot him. My heart broke, not once, but over and over again. Every breath felt like a wound reopening. He was alive. But what life was this? That night, I couldn't sleep. His face, his eyes, the trembling of his hands. They followed me home. The world called it a miracle that I found him. But miracles aren't supposed to hurt like this. The next day, I returned to the same street. I didn't sleep the whole night. The picture of him sitting there burned in my mind. When I reached that corner again, he was still there, in the same spot, wrapped in the same dirty blanket, his head down, hands tucked close for warmth. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and cold food. Around him, people kept walking, stepping over lives they didn't want to see. I stood for a long time before he looked up. His face was swollen, his lips dry, his eyes red. His voice didn't come out, only a faint sound, like breath breaking. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't even flinch. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he once believed in, but no longer trusts. I sat beside him on the ground. The concrete was cold, but it didn't matter. He started to tremble. His hands were shaking, his eyes darting, like he was afraid someone might take him away again. His body looked strong once, but now it was thin and weak. His ribs pressed against his shirt. His arms were full of scars, each one shaped by pain I couldn't imagine. He didn't remember everything at once. The words came in pieces, a few at a time, between deep breaths and shaking hands. The story he told wasn't one of glory. It was survival. He said the convoy was ambushed in the mountains. Many soldiers died, some were captured. He was one of them. He was taken across borders, locked in camps that never existed on paper. Years passed. He became invisible. No letters, no records, no identity. Only a number on a list that nobody looked at. The soldiers who survived were forgotten. Some escaped, others vanished forever. He escaped too, but the world didn't believe him. The army had declared him dead. There were no papers, no fingerprints, no proof of who he was. He tried to return home, but every office said the same thing. His name didn't exist anymore. He lived on the streets, he begged for food, he slept under bridges, in bus stations, on sidewalks. He searched for help, but people laughed. They thought he was just another old man with stories. The country he served no longer recognized his face. He said the nights were the hardest, not because of the cold, but because of the memories. He saw the ambush every time he closed his eyes. He heard the explosions, the screams, the silence that followed. He carried the ghosts of the men he couldn't save. He carried guilt heavier than hunger. He tried to find me once, years ago. He went back to our village. The old house was still there, but it was empty. He asked around. They told him his parents were dead. They said both had died waiting for their son who never came home. He believed them. He turned away and never looked back. I listened without speaking. Every word he said crushed a piece of me. The boy who left in uniform had returned as a man no one remembered. The country that took him never brought him back. I wanted to be angry, at the government, at the war, at the silence. But I couldn't. The only thing I felt was sorrow. A quiet kind of pain that sits deep in the chest and doesn't move. He looked down when he finished talking. The wind was cold, the sky turning gray. I realized then that I wasn't the only one who had been waiting. He had too. Not for me, not for recognition, but for peace. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. It felt fragile, like bone under thin cloth. He didn't pull away. For the first time in 35 years, we were in the same place again. Not in time, not in memory, but in reality. The truth wasn't what I had imagined. It wasn't a reunion. It was a wound reopened by finding what was once lost. He didn't come home as a hero. He came home as proof that sometimes survival costs more than death. I took him home that night. He didn't argue. He walked beside me quietly, his head down, his steps slow. The streets were dark and cold. The city lights flickered on puddles as we passed. Every few minutes I'd glance at him to make sure he was still there. His face looked calm, but his eyes were far away, as if he was still walking through the mountains where he was lost. When we reached the house, he stopped at the gate. He looked at the old walls, the small porch, the lamp by the window that had burned every night for 35 years. He didn't step in at first. He just stood there, staring, his lips trembling. His body shook slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of what stood in front of him. I led him inside. The house smelled of dust and old wood. He walked slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, the walls, the frames on the shelves. His fingers stopped on a photo of a young soldier, him, smiling in his uniform. His hand shook when he picked it up. His eyes filled, but no tears came. He sat down in the chair where I used to wait for him every night. For a long time, he didn't move. I warmed some food and placed it on the table. He didn't eat much, just a few bites. His hands shook when he lifted the spoon. Every movement looked heavy, like it hurt to exist. After a while, he leaned back and stared at the wall. His breathing was slow, uneven. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the next room, listening to his breathing. It was faint, restless, filled with small gasps, like he was fighting a dream he couldn't escape. I realized he wasn't just alive, he was surviving. He had been doing it for decades. In the morning, I found him sitting outside, staring at the rising sun. He didn't say a word. His face was calm, but his eyes were empty. He looked like someone who had reached the end of something. As days passed, I tried to care for him the best I could. I cleaned him up, gave him clothes, trimmed his beard. He stayed quiet most of the time. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear him muttering, short words, names, numbers, fragments from a life trapped between war and memory. He didn't want to see anyone. When neighbors heard he had come back, they came to visit. They called it a miracle. They took photos, asked questions, told me I was lucky. I smiled for them, but inside, I was breaking. Because I knew what they didn't. This wasn't a miracle. It was heartbreak walking on two legs. He didn't look at the visitors. He didn't respond when they asked about the war. He stared at the floor, silent, lost somewhere deep inside himself. When they left, I saw him close his eyes and exhale slowly, like relief. One evening, I sat beside him. The house was quiet. The light from the window fell on his face, and I noticed how old he had become. Older than his years. Older than the war itself. He looked tired of being alive. I realized something that night. The man who sat beside me wasn't the boy I lost. That boy died in the mountains. The man who came back was what the world had left behind. I cried that night harder than I did the day I got the letter saying he was missing. Back then, I cried for losing him. Now, I cried because I had found him. He fell asleep sitting in the chair, and I sat beside him until morning. The lamp glowed softly, the same one that had burned every night while I waited for him. Only this time, it didn't burn for hope. It burned for what hope had turned into. I finally understood what it meant to find someone after a lifetime. That sometimes finding them doesn't heal you. It breaks you in a new way. Word spread quickly. People came from nearby towns to see him. They called it a miracle. They took pictures, wrote articles, told stories about faith and patience. They said it was proof that love can survive time. But they didn't see the truth. They didn't see the nights. They didn't see the shaking, the quiet screams, the silence that followed every noise. They only saw what looked good, a father reunited with his long-lost son. But reunions are easy to photograph and hard to live. He stayed with me, but the war never left him. Every sound made him flinch. Every shadow made him turn his head sharply, his body tensing like a soldier ready for attack. He ate little, spoke even less. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground, as if something there still demanded his attention. I tried to talk, to make him remember small things, his mother's cooking, the old radio, the garden where he used to play. He nodded sometimes, but mostly, he just stared ahead. His memories had holes in them, and through those holes, all the pain of his life leaked out. I began to understand that I hadn't just found my son, I had found the aftermath of war itself. What war leaves behind isn't always visible. Sometimes it's just silence that follows a lifetime of noise. Doctors came to see him. They said he had severe trauma, that his mind was caught between then and now. They said healing was possible, but slow. I didn't tell them I had waited 35 years already. Waiting was all I knew how to do. At night, he walked the house quietly, moving from room to room. Sometimes I'd find him standing by the window, looking out into the darkness, as if waiting for someone else to come home. Sometimes he'd whisper names I didn't know, names of men who never returned. I didn't ask, I just listened. The house felt full again, not of joy, but of weight. The kind of weight that hangs in the air and never leaves. The neighbors said I should be grateful. I was, but not in the way they thought. I was grateful that he was breathing, that I could still see him. But I was also grieving, because the man I had prayed to find had returned carrying ghosts. He tried to help around the house, but even simple tasks made him tremble. The sound of a hammer made him freeze. The sight of fire made him back away. Once, when thunder cracked outside, he dropped to the floor and covered his head. I stood there helpless, realizing that his war never ended. People stopped visiting after a while. The story grew old. The newspapers found new headlines. The miracle became yesterday's news. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. But inside the house, time didn't move. We spent our evenings sitting in silence. I'd light the lamp, and we'd both stare at it. The same lamp that had burned through years of waiting. Now it burned for both of us. He'd sometimes look at it and smile faintly, but the smile never reached his eyes. As months passed, he grew weaker. The years of hunger and cold had done damage that couldn't be undone. His body was there, but it was tired. Some days he'd stay in bed all morning, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I'd sit beside him, waiting for him to speak, but he rarely did. Words had left him. I started talking to him the way I used to when he was a child, about the farm, the neighbors, the weather. It didn't matter if he answered. What mattered was that he was there. I realized something one night while watching him sleep. I had waited half my life for this, not knowing that finding him would feel like losing him all over again. The pain was quieter now, but it cut deeper. Because this time I couldn't fix it. I couldn't protect him. I couldn't bring him peace. He had returned, but not to live. Only to rest for a while in the home that never stopped waiting. He stayed for months, but the silence between us never disappeared. The house that once waited for laughter became a quiet shelter for two ghosts, one old, one broken. Every morning, I'd wake before him and stand at the window, watching the first light hit the road. That same road he once walked down in uniform, strong and sure, now led to nowhere. He slept longer each day. His body was weak, his breath shallow. The years he lost had finally caught up to him. I didn't need a doctor to tell me what was coming. I just knew. One evening, I sat beside him as the sun went down. The room was filled with the same orange light I remembered from the day he left for war. He opened his eyes slowly and looked around the house. His gaze stopped at the lamp by the window, the one that had burned for decades, waiting for him. His lips moved slightly, but no words came out. His eyes stayed fixed on that light, calm and still. The air felt heavy, but peaceful. I reached for his hand. It was cold, but steady. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just breathed slowly, as if letting go of all the weight he had carried. The room grew darker, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the old clock. When the lamp flickered, I thought I saw something change in his face, the kind of calm that comes when pain finally leaves the body. His breathing slowed. His hand loosened in mine. The quiet that followed was deeper than any silence I had ever known. I sat there, holding him, until the first bird outside began to sing. The next morning, I opened the window and let the cold air in. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. I had spent them all years ago when I thought he was gone forever. Now, I only felt stillness, a strange peace that comes when the waiting ends. I placed his uniform on the bed, folded neatly. The flag the army had sent me all those years ago lay beside it. For the first time, the words "missing in action" no longer haunted me. He wasn't missing anymore. He was home. The neighbors came again. They called it destiny. They said it was a story that would inspire others, a father who waited, a son who returned. They didn't understand that this wasn't a story. It was a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. After the burial, I walked back alone. The world around me was bright and full of life, but I felt weightless, like a man who had finally put down the heaviest burden of his life. I sat by the window that night and looked at the lamp. I didn't light it again. It had done its job. The next days passed quietly. I ate little, slept often. The house felt empty, but not in the same way as before. It wasn't the emptiness of loss. It was the emptiness of peace. I went through his belongings, the uniform, the boots, the medals that had gathered dust. I cleaned each one and placed them neatly in a box. I wrote one line on the inside of the lid. He went to serve his country, and his country forgot to bring him home. Every morning, I walk to the small grave behind the house. It's next to the one where his mother rests. I sit there in silence, watching the light move across the grass. I don't talk. I don't pray. I just listen to the wind. Sometimes it sounds like his voice. 35 years of waiting ended not with joy, but with understanding. The world may forget its soldiers, but a father never does. The day he left, I thought I lost my son. The day I found him, I realized I lost time, hope, and a part of myself that never came back. Final thought. My son vanished in the army and returned as a man broken by war. The nation buried his name, but I kept his light burning. In the end, he found his way back, not as a hero, not as a soldier, but as my son who finally came home.